Well, hi there. I'm here today with a wily little frilled dragon, which is obviously one of the coolest lizards in the world. I mean, they are so cool that probably the best dinosaur movie that has ever been made had to make a dinosaur that doesn't have a rad frill like this, have a rad frill like this, just so it would be almost as cool as the frilled dragon. And we're talking about a stinking dinosaur here. This guy comes to us from Animal Ark in Orem, Utah, and I've talked to you before about what a great pet shop they are and how much I recommend them. And this guy, he doesn't have a name, so we shall call him henceforth Dennis Nedry, and some of you will know why that is, and you're my kind of people. These guys are so rad. They've got this really cool frill. I'm going to try not to stress him out too much, but when they get frightened, they'll open their mouth and show this big frill. They can even stand up on two legs and run away like Tyrannosaurus Rex. They are everything that the Dilophosaurus should have been, but wasn't in its time. This is one of the coolest animals that's ever lived. But, is it the right pet for you? Overall, we have given the Frilled Dragon a score of 2.6 out of 5, which is pretty low, but hopefully it'll make sense here in a moment. And that's going to come down to our 5 categories, which are handleability, care, hardiness, availability, and upfront costs. When it comes to handleability, we give the Frilled Dragon a score of 3 out of 5. I want to start off by saying that this is just a juvenile Frilled Dragon. Frilled Dragons, the Australian species, which are actually fairly uncommon, can get up to about 3 feet in length. This is one of the Indonesian dragons, and they can get to about 2 feet in length. So this guy, he's probably only about half the maximum length that he could attain, and he could get a lot larger than this overall. But generally, kind of roughly about the same size as a bearded dragon, but not quite as heavy-bodied. And there are a lot of things about them, as they're close relatives of the bearded dragon, that are comparable to the bearded dragon when it comes to handling. But I would say, generally speaking, they're not quite as good about handling as a bearded dragon. Many of them are prone to stressing, and they can bite, and they've got sharp little teeth. So do bearded dragons, but you don't want to get bit by either of them very much. It'll definitely draw some blood, especially from an adult. Also, if they're stressing, that can be hard on the animal. We're going to try to keep handling to a minimum with this guy today and get him back in his enclosure pretty soon, because we don't want him to get stressed. That's not something that affects bearded dragons in quite the same way. You'll notice at times he's going to try to jump out of my hands, and I will kind of stop him with his tail, and there are a lot of lizards that I would not do that with, or not want to do that with. But a lovely thing about most agamid lizards, which include the frilled dragons and bearded dragons, is that they don't drop this tail, and that's a wonderful thing. Many frilled dragons, it's really just going to depend on the individual, but they can be excellent about handling. A lot like bearded dragons, they like to get somewhere high. These guys probably almost more so than bearded dragons. Though, and this is worth noting, when they're stressed, they've got a few awesome defense measures that they'll unveil on you. First, the frill. And you can see this guy, he's a little bit stressed, he's wanting to run away, but he's not so scared yet that he's sticking that frill out. They'll open their mouth real wide, puff that frill out, and show how big they are. And that's why his name is Dennis Nedry. Because, as far as we know, there were no dinosaurs that could do this. But there is one stinking rad lizard that will, and that's this guy. Oh yeah, you're a good dude. You hear that hissing? He's just trying to scare me off. And it might work. There's those cool teeth. But he's getting a little nervous. And I'd like to let him just sit on my shoulder. Frilled dragons in the wild, they're going to spend most of their time pretending to be a stick. And so if I can give him that option, he might be a pretty happy camper. You want to pretend to be a stick? You're just a stick, I don't even know you're there. When it comes to care, we give the Frilled Dragon a score of 3 out of 5. There are a number of downsides to these guys that you need to keep in mind. One of them is that they're going to eat a pile of insects every day. Maybe a couple times a day you're going to be feeding them insects, a lot of them. That means you need to have things like crickets, superworms, hornworms, Dubia Roaches. You're really going to want to breed your own Dubia Roaches, or you're going to pay an arm and a leg for that, but we'll get to that in a minute. On top of that, they may take some vegetation. I definitely would recommend trying to offer it to them, things like mustard greens, collard greens, spring mix. Offer them a diversity of things to see if they will take any. I've heard a lot of them won't, but it would be good if they could eat some as part of their diet. They're not going to eat nearly as much as, say, a bearded dragon, though. Also, they need frequent misting, which means you're going to want to either set up a misting system or be prepared to mist them 1, 2, maybe 3 times a day. They sometimes will drink out of standing water, but a lot of times they just don't recognize that as a water source. And so you need to make sure that you provide them with droplets of water to drink, a lot like a chameleon, so that they don't become dehydrated. They need a large, for a lizard this size, very large, mostly vertically oriented enclosure. So it needs to be probably more focused on being tall than being wide. They don't need a tremendous amount of floor space, but they need a lot of height and areas to climb. You also need to keep the humidity up, quite a bit higher than, say, for a bearded dragon. And, like a bearded dragon, they're going to need UVA, which is heat, and UVB, which are the UV bulbs. You're going to need to have both of those, or mercury vapor bulbs. So something that provides UV, and that means that you're going to need to buy expensive lighting, and you need to replace that fairly often. And we'll have links to all these things down in the description. One other thing to be careful with those lights is that you don't get the light too close to them, because they actually can singe their little frill if they get too close to the light bulb. And so to provide an adequate basking area, you're going to need a bigger light farther away so that they don't get too close or maybe touch it. When it comes to hardiness, we give them a score of 3 out of 5. Most of these guys are farm raised, which means kind of like you'd see with iguanas or Chinese water dragons. Somebody's basically collecting these from the wild, though they've got a big breeding population in their backyard. They come over, they're imported, stressed and dehydrated, starved, and probably full of parasites. And so there's a very good chance that in the first few months, your frilled dragon could just crash and die on you, and that's terrible. If you get one that is captive bred, or a very long-term captive, then it's probably going to be pretty hardy as long as you set it up right with the right water and food sources and temperature gradients available to it. Once they're established, they should be very hardy captives, but like I said, those first few months can be very sketchy. When it comes to availability, we give these guys a score of 2 out of 5. They are actually fairly hard to find. Not impossible, not by any means. They're going to be really difficult to find captive bred. Very, very difficult, but probably worth getting that way if you can. Generally speaking, though, if you look online or at expos, you are going to be able to find them. Not a ton of people are going to be selling them, but they will be out there. You can probably get one if you really want one. Also, like with Animal Ark and Orem, if you've got a stinking rad pet shop near you, there's a chance that they will have frilled dragons in there periodically. So just keep an eye on things. You can talk to the owners. A lot of times they can get in specific animals that you're looking for, if you don't feel comfortable contacting a breeder or an importer yourself. When it comes to upfront costs, we give these guys a score of 2 out of 5. Honestly, for a lizard this size and that isn't even captive bred, I would say they're very expensive. I really don't understand why they're so expensive for an import. Their enclosure that they're going to need is going to be large and expensive, and you're probably going to need to build it yourself, which means you gotta have access to power tools and things. Their lights are expensive. They're the most expensive lights you're gonna need for any reptile we've talked about. So you're gonna need those heat bulbs and those UV bulbs, and you're gonna need to replace those on a fairly regular basis. Those UV bulbs, for example, only last 6 months to a year, depending on the type that you get. They're also gonna need a substrate that holds humidity, water dish, a misting system, or a misting bottle if you're willing to do it yourself every day. A lot of big branches to climb on. And then you're going to have a pretty good setup going. Just overall, for a lizard this size, they are very expensive. I mean, you know, if you have just a little bit more floor space available for about the same amount of money, you could probably buy and keep a tegu. Tegus are about as good as it gets. Not to say these guys aren't stinking rad, because they're amazing, but for me, if I had to choose, I'd probably pick a tegu. Overall, once again, we give the Frilled Dragon a score of 2.6 out of 5. They are a really cool animal. Kind of a really interesting alternative to things like a bearded dragon if you think those are a bit too common. Personally, I would recommend a bearded dragon far over a frilled dragon, but there is just something so neat about them. They're so unusual, and that frill is so cool. I mean, ideally you almost never see them do that frilling behavior, but it's so rad, and they can stand up on 2 legs and run like a Tyrannosaurus Rex. They're awesome lizards. I can see why you'd want one. So sort of like chameleons, even though these are sort of a more difficult pet reptile to keep, it might be worth it. I hope this has helped you make a good decision. I hope it's helped you figure out if the frilled dragon is right for you. And if not, we got buckets of other stinking rad lizards that you should check out, like this one right here. As always, like and subscribe, and we hope to see you real soon.
Action!
Well, hi there.
Wait, hold on.
Oh, okay. Clankety clank.
Sorry.
It all spirals off of the well hi there.
Sorry, man.
I'll be in my trailer. Okay. 5 categories, which are Bloopers rich, which are handleability, care, availability, nerds, availability, and upfront costs. Man, did I nail it that time!
The doctor ended up telling me I'm not super worried. If
Are you crocheting back there?
Yes.
Have you always done this?
No.
Okay. We've lost her.
I'm still here.
These guys. I'll be right back.
Oh my! Look at his
Do you see him?
splayed legs.
Yeah, he's chill.
Hey, buddy. Did you see him?
Yeah, I jumped right over your
And he went on 2 legs for a second there.
You're not gonna look at
Whoa!
it. We are recording. Whoa!
A lot of them
Phrase that.
about frequent misting.
Yeah.
Whoop! Wanting to jump off the table just yet. See stick? They're extinct. Frilled Dragon.